Hi there and welcome back. This is Gina from McGuire. So today I am revisiting one of my all-time favorite techniques. This is one that I did for many years when I used to travel teaching classes, and it's one of those wow techniques that is so easy to do and gives great results every time. If you like the look of watercolor but struggle with coming up with good results, or just want to make the process faster, today's technique will be good for you too. I will also talk about different ways of doing this technique and different inks that you can use. My first examples use the new Hero Arts Peonies stamp set. This is a fantastic set. I really like the sentiments on it, but that large peony image is perfect for this technique. Florals are great for this. Backgrounds work also, which I'll show you later. I'm using the MISTI stamping tool simply because I'm making several cards, but you could instead use an acrylic block. For this technique, I highly recommend watercolor paper. I prefer the Tim Holtz watercolor paper because it is very white, bright white, but any watercolor paper will work. I used my anti-static powder tool, and now I'm stamping the image with Versamark ink. Normally, I do this technique with white embossing powder, but today I decided to use Hero Arts pearl embossing powder. Either would work, but that pearl embossing powder gives a beautiful pearl shine that I thought would be fun to use. So I did several of these heat embossed images so I can compare different inks for you. Now the inks that I think work great for this technique are distress inks. On the bottom I have distress inks, the traditional ones that have been out for some time, and on the top are the distress oxide inks. These inks are a little bit different, and I have a video comparing them, and I'll link to that here if you haven't seen it. I recommend watching that to learn more. I'll talk a little bit about the two as I create. For my first example, I'm using the traditional distress ink, and I am directly applying this ink onto my image. You can see that I am not taking any care. It looks like a complete hot mess. That's okay. I'm going to spray it very generously with water. So much water that it pools up on our image. So you can see it's completely wet, and I'll set it aside and let it dry. I also heat embossed the matching leaves, and I'm putting 2 shades of green onto that and spraying it generously with water. Now here are the Distress Oxide inks, the same colors, Wild Honey and Picked Raspberry, but in the oxide. These will be much creamier, but I wanted to show you either of these inks work for this technique. The regular Distress ink, which I just showed you, will be more vibrant. This will give a creamier result, but both are beautiful. Here I'm using Lucky Clover and the Twisted Citron for the leaves. Now my third example with the peony, I use Perfect Pearls mixed in my water. So you see that little jar of Perfect Pearls? I put about 1/2 teaspoon into that mist bottle with a full bottle of water, and I shake it up. I've actually had it stored that way for some time. I'm again using traditional distress inks here, but you could use the oxide. Spraying it generously with that pearlized water, and when this dries, it'll have a really beautiful pearly shine. You can see that I am doing this very quickly, taking no care to make sure that the colors all work together. Instead, I am just generously putting that water on top and letting the water do all of the work for me. The hardest part about this technique is letting it sit and dry on its own. It's going to look like a hot mess. You're going to want to mess with it, but don't. If you just let it do its job, it will dry beautifully. So here are the examples after they've dried on their own. So on the right are the traditional distress ink. You can see it's very vibrant, and the colors blend together nicely. The one on the left is the Distress Oxide ink, and that has a more creamy look to it. The one on the top, up at the top of the screen, that's the one I did with traditional distress ink and the pearlized water. That's my personal favorite because it has that beautiful shine to it. I've done this technique so many times in the past, and no matter what 2 or 3 colors you choose on a flower like this, they will always work together nicely. I just chose pink and yellow today because I wanted something bright. Okay, so for the background of these cards, I wanted to keep it simple with a white on white look. So I have used some Hero Arts background dyes, and I'm adhering them to the note cards with foam tape for nice dimension. You can see how beautiful that is. And that's a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch note card. Now to adhere my flowers and leaves, which I, by the way, cut out, I'm using Gina Connect glue. This is a great strong glue, and the nice thing is you can move it around until it's dry. So I can lift it up and tuck some leaves under it here and there, or move it or rotate it until I'm happy with the position. And then I just let it dry there. So I'm tucking leaves to kind of peek out from behind the flowers. And now it's time to add a die cut sentiment to the center. I'm using the Hero Arts Smile and Stamp die set. You can see it over to the right. It's a small stamp set with the smile die. I'm just using the die today. I've stacked 3 black smile die cuts on top of each other. And now I'm gluing it directly onto my flower. Next, I stamped a little strip here that says "It's Your Birthday" from this older Hero Arts Birthday Messages stamp set. I made sure to use my T-roller to make sure that it is straight on the card. Okay, so I assembled the 3 cards very similar, and I wanted to show you a comparison of the final results. On the left, we have the traditional distress ink. On the right is the Oxide ink. And then here, this third card is the one that I used the pearlized water, where I added the perfect pearls. So you can see the beautiful shine that gives. This gives a gorgeous watercolor look with no effort at all. We just let the water do the work for us. Now for the flower that was done with the traditional distress ink, I added a white stacked smile die cut to the front of the flower, and I used this Hero Arts Bold Graphic Confetti die for the background. I again used thin strips of foam tape so that it had some dimension. When you're doing that with a white die cut against a white note card, adding that dimension to it really creates a beautiful look because you get little shadows. Now for the flower I made with Distress Oxide inks and water, I added a thanks die cut to the center. I again stacked 3 of them on top of each other. I find that's a great way for a white die cut to stand out when it's on top of an image like this. But again, my favorite of all of these flowers is the one where I added the perfect pearl to the water. You can see the shine that you get. And I really like the black die cut because it stands out against that flower. Okay, I thought I'd do another example of using distress ink and water to quickly get a watercolor look. In this case, I'm using the Hero Arts Magnolia stamp set. I thought this image was beautiful, and I really liked the sentiments with it, especially the wishing you well. Now instead of doing the pearl embossing powder on Versamark, so I end up with a white pearl look, I'm going to do the pearl embossing powder on black ink, so I end up with a black pearl look. So this is watercolor paper again. I'm stamping with black pigment ink, and I'll add that Hero Arts Pearl Embossing Powder. So the black will show through this embossing powder a little bit. Basically, this embossing powder picks up whatever color's behind it and gives it like a metallic pearl look. So you can see it's like this dark metallic gray. It's just gorgeous. Now I'm cutting the leaves off of the image right up against the outside of the flower. I'll be able to put these images back together later. I added a little squeezed lemonade and a tiny little bit of wild honey to the center of the flower. And then I'm spraying it generously, very generously, with the pearlized water. And I'll set that aside and let that do its own work. Now for the leaves, I just put down some twisted citron and some mowed lawn, again very quickly, and then sprayed that generously with the pearlized water. If you don't have perfect pearls, just use your water, or you can use some kind of shimmer spray too. For the background, I used the Hero Arts Bandana background stamp, and I stamped it with the Hero Arts Soft Vanilla, so it's a very soft, beautiful look. I'm using a sentiment from that Peony stamp set that I used earlier in the video. Again, I'm stamping this with the black pigment ink and using the pearl embossing powder on top, so that this has that same kind of charcoal metallic pearl look as the flower, so they match nicely. I finished this off with a few pearls here and there, and I really like the look of this one. It shows you that you can get soft color on a flower by just using a little bit of distress ink. If you want bold color like I did before, you just put more ink down. But in either case, I use a lot of water so that the water or the color moves on its own and gives you kind of a watercolor look. Here's another example with the same flower. This time I used the white pearl embossing powder with Versamark ink, so you have a white outline that's very subtle and has a pearly shine. I also used quite a bit more wild honey ink so that the flower would be more vibrant. I used the Bandana stamp in the background, and I used the white pearl embossing powder with it. And then for the sentiment, and the inside it says, "I miss you." And these two sentiments are actually from the Hero Arts Food Puns stamp set. Completely different feel to that stamp set, but the sentiments seem to work on just about anything. Okay, I wanted to show you that you can also do this technique with any kind of water-based markers. You can also get that fun watercolor look very quickly. Here I'm using the Hero Arts Flowers for Coloring stamp set and the coordinating dies. Now to save time, instead of taking all of these stamps off of the stamp set liner, I'm actually going to put the entire stamp set into my MISTI. So the stamping side is facing up, and I'm taping my watercolor paper into the door of the MISTI. So I'm actually doing this kind of backwards. The stamp is inside of the MISTI and the paper will be on the door. But this will save me quite a bit of time. I use my anti-static powder tool. I'm inking up all of those images with Versamark ink, and I'll close the door to transfer all that ink onto the watercolor paper. You want to put a lot of muscle in it since there are so many images in here. Now I'm adding that white pearl embossing powder once again. You can use white embossing powder if that's all you have, and then I'll heat set that. So very quickly I was able to heat emboss all of those images. Now I'm using the coordinating dies to cut them out. You could cut them out by hand, but those dies do save quite a bit of time. To apply color, I'm just quickly scribbling color down with my Tombow dual brush pens. I really like these pens and I use them an awful lot. You could also use your Zig Clean Color Real Brush pens here or other water-based pens that move nicely with water. After scribbling some color onto my images, I spray them very generously with that pearlized water once again. I don't mess with it. I let that water make the color kind of move, and as it dries, you'll get a beautiful look. So I created a bunch of really bright and vibrant flowers and leaves. You can see they're very wet, and I'll set that aside to dry. When I come back, I'll have lots of images ready to go. For the background of my note card, I'm using the Hero Arts Tile Pattern Stencil, and I'll apply some Moonstone glitter paste. This stuff is really fun, and it really picks up the color that you have on your project. It's a gorgeous glitter. After I've applied this, I'll remove my stencil and clean it right away, and then I will have a beautiful background with lots of texture and shine. Next, I'm going to arrange all my flowers on my card. What I like to do is have an extra card where I do the arranging of the pieces so that I can just pick them up and move them over to my card and know exactly where to put them. I originally was going to do a white strip with a black sentiment, but switched it and did a black strip with a white sentiment. That "You Are Such a Blessing" is from the Peonies stamp set that I showed you earlier. I'm again using the Gina Connect glue to very quickly add adhesive to the back, and then I can move the flowers around until I'm happy with where they are. Once I have everything positioned, I will add a few pearls to the center of the flowers. And there you can see the fun kind of watercolor look that we got very quickly with markers and water. And you can see the pearl eye shine because I did have some of that pigment powder, or the Perfect Pearl pigment powder, in the water when I sprayed it. This is very vibrant. If you wanted a softer color, you could just put down less of the color onto your images and then more water. Okay, my last example shows how to use this technique for really quick backgrounds. In this case, I'll use Distress Oxide inks just to show the differences. This is the Hero Arts Blossoms for Coloring stamp. This is excellent for stamping and coloring on the go, but in today's example, I'm going to use it for a very quick background. I again have watercolor paper in my MISTI. I'm inking up my stamp with Versamark ink, and I'll stamp that very firmly onto that. And then I will once again add that white pearl embossing powder. I'm telling you, I love this embossing powder. I find that I'm reaching for it just as often as I do my clear and my white. Once I have that heat set, I'm going to very quickly apply 3 colors of Distress Oxide ink. We have a Salty Ocean, Wild Honey, and Picked Raspberry. You could do more colors, but these 3 will blend together nicely and give you a rainbow look. I'm now spraying it very generously with water. You could use the Perfect Pearl water, but I just decided to use plain old water this time, and we're really putting a lot of water onto it. To force some of the mixing of the yellow and blue, I used my finger to kind of scribble through it, and I did the same between the pink and the yellow. After letting this dry, I end up with a beautiful background. I trimmed it down and added it to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card. Next, I'm using the coordinating dies for the Hero Arts Blossoms for Coloring stamp set that you see there to the left. And I just die cut the coordinating dies from white cardstock. And I've arranged them kind of in a cluster on my card. Then I have a congratulation message from that Peonies stamp set from earlier in the video. I'm removing all of the top die cuts, and I'm first stamping on the bottom die cuts. I'm stretching this congratulations along all of those dimensional die cuts. Now I'm going on and adding the next layer in with some adhesive and stamping again. Because I'm using the MISTI, it will stamp in the same place each time. So my sentiment will be stretched across all of these die cuts. Finally, I put the top die cut in place, and then I remove that and add it with foam tape so that there's lots of dimension to it. So look at your coordinating dies. Sometimes you can use the coordinating dies without using the stamps, just to get more out of them. I added the sentiment, "We are so happy for you," underneath with black ink. And then I stamped that background stamp onto the flap of my envelope so that I would have a coordinating envelope. This time I stamped it with Versamark ink, and I added white embossing powder, and then it'll be a perfect match for our background. I did add a few pearls here and there, and there's a closer look at the sentiment stretched across those die cuts, and also that really quick background that we created by putting down Distress Oxide ink very quickly, adding lots of water, and letting it dry on its own. So there you have some ways to do really fast watercolor looks on your cards. I'll link to another video using this technique if you're interested. Below in the YouTube description are the supplies that I used, but you can go to my blog for more information. Thanks for spending time with me today. We'll see you again soon, and have a good day.